Charges of a UFO cover-up began almost with the first famous flying saucer sightings in late June of 1947. It's interesting. These reports seem to center around areas where atom bombs and rockets were tested. Were alien forces keeping watch on the new weapons we savages had invented? This really is an interesting question and quite a coincidence. These flying discs became the Pentagon's nightmare. Seemingly, our fastest fighter jets could never come close to their incredible speeds and high G-force maneuverability. These unidentified flying objects were said to be able to shut down our guided missile silos by remote control. The Air Force then organized Project Blue Book to officially investigate these UFO anomalies. Since its termination in 1969, it has been alternately
the Air Force
praised
position
and
is that we
damned.
investigated UFOs for 22 years, over 12,000 sightings.
Colonel Don Burgrade, U.S. Air Force.
About 95% of all the UFOs were explainable. They were weather phenomenon, they were balloons, they were airplanes, they were lightning. And we concluded as a result of our investigations, which was carried out very scientifically, that one, there was no threat to the security of the United States, and there was no evidence that we could ever locate that an extraterrestrial vehicle had landed here.
New York lawyer Peter Gersten sued the CIA and FBI to release 5,000 UFO documents.
The reading of all the documents reveals that UFOs have the ability to render inoperable present-day technology. UFOs have the ability to gain access to our most sensitive military installations, unrestricted and unlimited access to nuclear installations.
There's no doubt about it in my mind that there's a government UFO cover-up.
This is Ray Fowler, civilian UFO researcher for 17 years.
I've talked to military people who have told me about government cover-ups, how they've been instructed to say this and to say that. And I worked for the United States Air Force Security Service myself, and which worked for the National Security Agency, and I'm very familiar with intelligence operations and cover stories and things like that. So there's no doubt in my mind that there is a cover-up.
If there was a planned cover-up, then they were very successful in keeping it from me.
Colonel Robert Friend, former head of Project Blue Book, now an engineer on the space shuttle.
A lot of these organizations decided that there was a cover-up because the Air Force didn't pursue these sightings to what they considered the ultimate conclusion.
I believe we all know that the UFO cover-up naturally would have began in the Roswell, New Mexico incident. It's really one of the most well-documented cases in history. Roswell was home base for many early tests of atom bombs and guided missiles at that time, and this is where the military stonewalling on the subject really began. The case began when Roswell businessman Dan Wilmot witnessed an amazing object over the town, and his son now tells the story.
This was their home in July of 1947, and it was one summer evening. They were sitting out here. Dad looked up in the west and saw an object that came down and had lights blinking, and it was rather frightening to him, but he said all of a sudden it seemed to rock a little bit and sort of counterbalanced itself, wiggle a little bit, then seemed to settle down and take off at a rapid rate of speed.
The next day, reporters heard the Air Force had found fragments of a mystery object that crashed on a remote ranch northwest of Roswell. Excitement ran high until officials announced it was only a weather balloon. Then Major Jesse Marcel, who was in charge of the operation at the time, tells a far different story in this interview.
They took pictures, of course. They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed or told the newspapers, the newsmen, what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon, of course, which we both knew differently.
Major Marcel had to keep silent because of his strategic position at that time, as he was in charge of all of the security and intelligence on atomic tests in the United States and the Pacific. Marcel then retraced his steps through his secret recovery operation through the New Mexico desert.
We left Roswell perhaps around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, You can see it's flat. It is very difficult. In fact, with just verbal directions, we never would have found it. We had to follow the rancher out there.
Keep in mind, the crash site was so remote, it took an entire day for him to drive there.
The following morning, we went out to the site where the crash was. And what I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. So we proceeded to pick up as much of the debris as we could, loaded in the wagon. We filled that up. It took us a good part of the day to do that, because it was such small fragments that we had to do a lot of picking. We found a piece of metal about a 1.5 to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. But the thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it. You couldn't dead it. Even with a sledgehammer, it would bounce off of it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was.
This is why I love comparing older footage to our newer footage, because again, we can look for that magical word consistency. We know in Roswell in 1947, many of you have heard the story of it, that there was these claims. Jesse Marcellus claimed that I've got interviews with Glenn Dennis, who was a mortician on the site. But what gets interesting is that we look forward 50 years approximately, and we hear a different term of consistency in a completely different part of the world. Let me explain. The Virginia UFO incident involved a series of events in 1996 when residents of Virginia, Brazil, claimed seeing one or more strange creatures and at least one unidentified flying object that had crashed. According to media reports, a creature was sighted on the afternoon of the 20th of January of 1996 by 3 women ranging from ages 14 to 22 years old. The women described the creature as large-headed with spots like veins on the skin and some bumps on the head. Its eyes were 2 large red balls. This is an excerpt from a movie in 2022 called Moment of Contact. It's with one of the witnesses of the Virginia incident. And I want you to listen carefully to the description he gives and compare that to Jesse Marcel in 1947. So let's look at that. We're looking at 49 years apart, people that have never met, 2 completely different areas of the world. And this is the description that he gives.
Eu vi pedaço como se fosse de alumínio, aqueles papéis que se enrola frango para assar. No chão, eu peguei o papel. Eu peguei e amassei aquilo, era muito leve, amassei. Mas no que eu soltei ele voltou mesmo formado.
Now, Jesse Marcel also stated about the substrate of the craft, as far as its material being as thin as the foil on a pack of cigarettes, and saying that it could not be damaged. He also expressed that when it was crumbled up, it would actually spring back to its original shape. There is new evidence that the FBI then got into the case with a different cover story. Lawyer Peter Gerson is seen here searching through declassified documents and came across the mention of the Roswell case.
One of those documents related to an incident in Roswell, New Mexico, which indicated that the object which had crashed was an experimental kite. The FBI investigated the incident and determined that it was terrestrial, that it was from an organization which had been doing research in experimental kites.
The similarities between the Roswell incident and the Virginia, Brazil incident are really remarkable, as there's certainly no doubt
It was not
there were
anything
UFO crashes.
from this earth that I'm quite sure of, because I was being an intelligence officer. I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not be. It could not have been.
To develop the first atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project was our first totally secret military operation. Secrecy has continued to this day as an instrument of foreign policy. Official fabrications have become a vital link to security for our government to pursue research on this phenomena. One example is we never admitted to the U-2 spy aircraft until the Russians managed to shoot one down from their skies. It was thought that an aircraft that could fly at 70,000 feet would be beyond the reach of Soviet fighters, missiles, and radar. We managed to capture an advanced enemy aircraft wreckage where even small fragments can reveal vital new information. Some of this capture material was routinely rushed to military bases similar to Wright-Patterson in Dayton, to their top-secret Foreign Technology Division. This place is so classified that former Air Force General Senator Barry Goldwater was once denied entrance. For 30 years, rumors have spread about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and according to the stories, the U.S. government was concealing under top security flying saucers from another world, including alien bodies cryogenically suspended in huge freezers. Such rumors could be easily dismissed, except that UFO researchers at that time have gathered information leaked from military sources, sources who claim to have seen the craft and the bodies. The stories and rumors all mention the mysterious Hangar 18 as the ultimate repository. This is some of the first footage ever released from the early 80s of it. We can only imagine what took place here. Wright-Patterson is one of the largest, most complex air bases in the world. In the Foreign Technology Division alone, hundreds of secret experiments have been undertaken. Continuing military security has made Hangar 18 a mysterious citadel. Some experts at that time believe that new designs have been created there. Every branch of the military has experimented with flying wedges, flying wings, and hovercraft with an amazingly inconsistent lack of results. The flying saucer shape was an obsession of aeronautical pioneer Edmund Doak. These rare films show static and dynamic tests of his early models. Ironically, just when he seemed on the verge of a breakthrough with his Doak 16 vertical takeoff plane, the Air Force canceled development on his projects. No reason was ever given. NASA tested the H-2F2 lifting body as a prototype for the space shuttle. As with all flying wedges, though, lack of stability was the single unsolvable problem. I find it super interesting at the amount of government effort at that time they've invested with researching these type of flying vehicles, and yet they act as if this shape just came from, guessing? I mean, it is super interesting when you think about it, and it really does show that something led them to picking this type of design. The Avro Canada VZ-9AV Avro car you see on the film here is actually the closest they ever came with the efforts of actually making a VTOL fighter bomber in the early 50s. Its circular shape gave the appearance of a flying saucer, and of course, once again, that was typically only seen in science fiction movies. From Wyndham, a suburb of Boston, comes an eyewitness account which could explain this continued military fascination with flying saucers. Ray Fowler, one of the most respected civilian UFO investigators, is also an author of two of the bestsellers in the field. Because of his stint in the Air Force Security Service, he finds himself still vulnerable to government pressure.
I work for a company that designed and built a major weapons system. And because of connections within the company, because of connections with Dr. Jalen Hynek, who was an Air Force investigator for many years, I came across information that indicated that this major weapon system, as well as others, had been disrupted by UFOs. And I gave a story to a national newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, which published this story. Within an hour after this particular paper was out, the Strategic Air Command had called my company. And the following day, the Pentagon called the company and threatened to send a letter of displeasure to the company if something wasn't done about my making these things public.
Because of similar pressures in his own work, a friend of Ray's has kept quiet for 27 years with an amazing story. We've all seen this before in previous documentaries. Safety is very important, and again, many people just do not want to give out any of their personal information because of repercussion naturally we've seen with the government. And the man finally agreed for the first time to talk, but only under strict conditions.
Your name will not be used.
They made up the name Fritz to protect the man's true identity. So Ray had to naturally vet out his friend to make sure that all of his background checked out. This is common. We've seen this all done before, and everything looked good.
In the case of Fritz, I started in 1973, went all the way back through the various companies he worked for, right back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, talked to people he worked with, and they all gave him a very clean bill of health. A reputable man, honest man, not the type that would fabricate a hoax, and a very efficient engineer manager.
Now, this process was shortened down, but Ray actually had to go over with this gentleman numerous times about how important this was. And this we hear a lot as well, that these guys simply do not want to speak. They have too much at stake. Their families are at stake.
So
it's
I
just
understand
not
it,
worth
Fritz.
it.
You were working for the United States Air Force.
The story began late one night in 1953 at Frenchman's Flat, Nevada. The man had been working as a consultant on the blast effects of the atom bomb when he was suddenly ordered to report for a new mission.
What happened after that?
We were put on a bus, which the windows were all completely covered with curtains and, in some cases, black paper taped to the windows. And we're driven for 3 or 4 hours, and we're not sure just where we were going. Several of us tried to guess where we might have been. We, at that time, came to the conclusion it was in the area of Kingman, Arizona.
This is a recreation, but after the scientists got off the bus, they were taken to an even more remote location. And of course, they had absolutely no idea where they were going. This, once again, we've heard previous stories of, and the government is very, very secretive on how they proceed.
We were told that we had been selected for various technical specialties. I was told that I was to ask any questions that had to do with dynamic loads and nothing more, and I wouldn't get any answers to any other question. It looked like 2 saucers, I would call it, one on top of the other, inverted, probably 25 to 30 feet in diameter.
In terms of something known, what kind of metal would it look like?
Well, it would look like a brushed aluminum. I'm sure it probably wasn't that. I say that because I noticed no scratch marks. And anything that would penetrate into the sand 20 inches that way would certainly have some scratch marks.
Now, I personally feel it's extremely interesting when you compare notes from what we know about Roswell's crash. And this image is inside of the Roswell Museum depicting the UFO's crash that happened in that incident. And when we hear this person explain what he has seen, it actually overlaps a lot of what we see right here, especially when he's saying that the craft was inside of sand approximately 20 inches. We look at that here, and again, the surface of the craft looks the same. We also see the penetration in the desert about the same distance. Again, visually, this is something that can't be depicted in this scale of a model, but it does give a representation that these people are both showing consistency in the stories that they're telling.
No signs of buckling, fracture, or anything?
Not that I could see. I accepted it was probably some United States government vehicle, a highly classified vehicle. In fact, we were told that that's what it was. Interestingly enough, one of the questions I needed to know was what the mass of the vehicle was. Well, I can tell a lot of things from the penetration into the desert sand and so forth, but I needed to know the mass. And they told me that they weren't going to let me know that. They perhaps didn't even know themselves. There was also a tent, which I didn't get to look into, but one fellow whom I did happen to talk with briefly until they told us to stop talking, said that he had seen 2 bodies inside this tent, 2 alien-looking bodies. It was brown, leathery skin, had a silver, like a cap on, without a bill.
Like a skull cap?
Yes, like a skull cap. I realized what this really started to mean, but I also at the same time realized probably why the government was keeping it classified. There are a lot of things that could be changed by our culture or religions. There are a lot of things that could be affected by the release of information like that at that particular time.
Like many other UFO stories, this always ends up with the craft being taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Media cameras are usually prohibited there, but for our team here, they were granted access. The investigative team did find that there are huge freezing chambers inside the legendary Hangar 18.
The only knowledge I have of little green men, Martians, or whatever would be from the articles I've read of some of the published novels like Frank Scully's book and things like that.
Don Ritter, the building's manager since 1942, claims the giant freezing cells were never used for storing alien bodies.
Building 18 at Wright-Patterson was used primarily for cold soak engine testing, and we had 4 cells in this facility that we would take down to minus 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Engineering is critical, and of course testing the engine components for aircraft is really detailed, but to say that you're using those freezers for that, it's an awful big coincidence, and I know many of you feel it's a bunch of BS as well as I do.
There should have been a gradual information release, and have the public accustomed to what UFOs are, what we're trying to do about them, and instead they've covered up so long that to admit that they've covered it up, it's almost like another Watergate. Plus the fact, I think they don't have the answers.
I believe we all know that the government never wanted anyone to
know
know that these
people
are
would
real.
want to know more answers. They don't have the answers to give them. I'm sure they don't have the answers to give them.
Based on my own personal and professional experiences, for the last 26 years of wearing this blue suit. And most of that I've been in the public affairs business, where I'm responsible for releasing information to the public. I can assure you on behalf of the Air Force that there's just no truth to that at all.
Wright-Patterson was the equivalent of Area 51 today. And my personal belief, like many of you, is I feel the government certainly still has alien bodies that they're working with, and God only knows what they've discovered. This is Colonel Robert Friend, former head of Project Blue Book, and he's going to discuss his thoughts.
I believe that speculation and a scientific approach to it can't live together. I would feel that there were, in lots of instances, cases that had potential scientific pay dirt that possibly should have been pursued further. And in that regard, yes, I think that some of the cases had a lot of promise.
The Roswell case and the story that came from the man known as Fritz are 2 dramatic examples of close encounters of the fourth kind. On April 30th, 2023, the Kenmore family called 911 to report something not human in their backyard. Police investigated in part because other officers had spotted a mysterious flashing light in the sky that same evening. The reaction of the Kenmore family appeared when the officer arrived to be genuinely startled by what they saw.
Big eyes?
Big eyes, still looking at him.
What?
A police officer's body camera captured a light flashing low in the sky on the night of May 1st. Then minutes later, someone made that 911 call saying 2 large figures were in their backyard. So officers responded and met up with the caller and his family.
What'd you see?
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I'm not going to BS you guys. One of my partners said they saw something fall out of the sky too, so that's why I'm kind of curious. Did you see anything land in your backyard? Or?
They see like a big, that's what they say. They see like a big
The picture you're about to see is an image from that encounter that has been enhanced and upscaled to provide better resolution to what the image holds. If you still don't see it, that's all right. I made it much easier to see the features of the head and large eyes by outlining its image. One can't help but think of the similarities of the aliens described in the early documentary you just reviewed, and the image of what you're seeing here taken 70 years after the crash described in the video, and 76 years after Roswell's crash. These people never met and are all from different parts of the country. They must all be great storytellers.